Johnson in for Joshua Johnson. Hello, Jason.
Glad to see you. Really excited. Good evening. Great to be with you tonight from NBC News World Headquarters in New York. I am Jason Johnson in for Joshua Johnson. Welcome to the week. In 66 days, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. This morning, we got a surprise when President Trump seemed to acknowledge part of reality with the words, "he won." He being Joe Biden. But less than an hour later, the Trump we know walked that back, saying, quote, "I concede nothing." The president-elect's new chief of staff says, "Don't let him," meaning Trump, "distract you."
I accept it as a further confirmation of the reality that Joe Biden won the election. Donald Trump's Twitter feed doesn't make Joe Biden president or not president. The American people did that.
This comes as the nation is already struggling to control the coronavirus outbreak. Today, the U.S. surpassed 11 million COVID cases after the nation recorded over 1 million new cases in 1 week. Keep in mind, it took the U.S. nearly 100 days from the first recorded case of COVID-19 to reach its first million. Now we're seeing that same number in just 7 days. Let's start with the latest on the Biden administration. Trump's refusal to comply with a peaceful transfer of power will have broad implications, including how the nation addresses the surging coronavirus pandemic. This morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci told CNN's Jake Tapper, it's about passing the baton.
As you know, I've been through multiple transitions now, having served 6 presidents for 36 years. And it's very clear that that transition process that we go through, that time, the period of measured in several weeks to months, is really important in a smooth handing over of the information, as well as it's almost like passing a baton in a race. You don't want to stop and then give it to somebody. You want to just essentially keep going. And that's what transition is. So it certainly would make things more smoothly if we could do that.
NBC News political reporter Ali Vitale is standing by in Wilmington, Delaware. Good evening, Ali. Is the Biden campaign losing patience with all this nonsense from the president? How much longer can they keep entertaining Trump's refusal to concede?
Hey, Jason, you know, it's not so much the lack of concession as it is the lack of letter of ascertainment from the General Services Administration. The concession is just words. It doesn't have to come. There are no legal implications to it. Certainly, it's American tradition, and it upholds the tenets of democracy. But this is not a transition team that is holding their breath, waiting for Donald Trump to concede. Instead, the thing that they're really looking to get this week is the letter that officializes their transition and would effectively put them out of the bureaucratic limbo that they're currently in, because right now they are a transition that cannot actually speak with any of the agency staff or people who are currently in government, because they have not been officially recognized by this otherwise obscure government agency that controls the flow of information and also the flow of resources, things like office space, email addresses, money for the transition to function with. All of those are the real hangups for this Biden transition right now. And you heard it in that bite from Anthony Fauci right there. The reason that you have a transition is because time is the one resource that you cannot get back. And so in this instance, as the Biden transition is clearly trying to center their pandemic response and prepare to take office after what could be a very dark winter, we're only seeing these cases continue to spike. What they're trying to do is plan and prepare for that. And they have a blockade in the way right now, preventing them from doing that. Think about this. They cannot actually talk to Anthony Fauci and his staff right now. And it's something that Fauci even reiterated this morning as he was doing the Sunday shows, that those conversations would be really helpful. And so the one silver lining that I have heard amidst all of this, certainly there is some foot tapping from Democrats here in Wilmington who are working on the transition. But otherwise, we've seen them sort of keep a calm exterior, at least publicly, letting this process play out as it is. They're not yet filing lawsuits or anything like that. The silver lining, though, that I've heard from people is that at least this is a group of people who have been in government before. Right. For Joe Biden, a former vice president, of course, it was only 4 years ago that he was in the White House. So people around him and he himself know how this typically works. He's familiar with accessing classified information. The same goes for Kamala Harris because of her role on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So a lot of these people are people who have been there before. Of course, the added wrinkle is that now they are trying to assume government amidst an ongoing pandemic. pandemic. So tomorrow we expect to hear from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris both. They're going to be getting briefed on the state of the economy and then giving remarks on how to bring the economy back in the long term. But they have always inextricably linked bringing back the economy with tackling the pandemic. What I'm really listening for is if they actually start to apply some pressure from the top, that now is the time for the General Services Administration to issue that letter and get this thing going. Jason?
NBC's Ali Vitali, thank you for your reporting. For more on this transition nonsense, let's bring in our political panel. Jake Sherman is a senior writer for Politico, co-author of Politico's Playbook, and an MSNBC contributor. Dr. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto is Assistant Dean for Civic Engagement and a lecturer at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, and an MSNBC contributor. And Dr. Christina Greer is an Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University and Politics Editor at The Grio. Jake, we'll start with the non-doctor. What should we make of Trump's tweets this morning? Is he ready to concede?
Listen, I feel inadequate here next to three people with doctorates, but I will say this: I think he's starting to recognize the reality as it is, and the people around him are suggesting that he needs to move on. I think that's quite obvious. That everybody around him recognizes he's not won the presidency, he has no chance. But this is all, as I put it last week in Playbook, and got a considerable amount of flack for it. This is all performance art. It's performance art that has huge impact. But I would say this. I would say the president is moving closer to a place of accepting the victory, even in a psychic sense. I don't imagine he'll give some speech saying it's been a great 4 years for me. I'll see you in another 4 years. But I do think that he's going to slowly kind of recede from this defensive posture, perhaps. And maybe I'm a little bit too hopeful. But I do think that over the next couple of days, you'll see somebody who's more accepting of the results.
Dr. DeFrancesco Soto, look, the Trump team announced that Rudy Giuliani will be taking over their legal fight. They haven't found their Jim Baker. This is more like my cousin Vinny. Is a Rudy announcement an admission on the part of the Trump administration that they know this is all over?
It is, and I want to echo what Jake said. I mean, this is all performance art. It's kabuki theater, but I think it's theater with a purpose. Because let's go back to who Donald Trump really is. He is a salesman. I mean, if we go back to the Trump steaks, to the Trump water, to the Trump board game, Trump University, we could go on and on and on. And so what I see in him holding out is it's a bit of petulance, like a kid not wanting to give up what he has. But I also see it as him thinking about it with his salesman cap on, that he wants to keep stoking that energy, that emotion, that anger in his base, because at the end of the day, those 70 million Trump voters will turn into prospective 70 million consumers, buying merchandise, buying who knows what he thinks up with. So I see almost a two-pronged approach in what Trump is doing. It's just not wanting to let go, but a little further down the line as well.
You know what? It's frozen. Let it go. Let it go, Mr. Trump. Dr. Greer, this morning, Biden's incoming chief of staff, Ron Klain, played down Trump's failure to concede, saying that Trump's Twitter feed has no impact on Biden's win. But should the Biden camp be getting more aggressive at this point? I mean, it's been a couple of weeks. We already know what's going on.
Right. I think, Joe Biden comes from that Obama school of, like, no drama Obama. I don't think that they feel like they're at the point where they have to start, sort of sending out smokescreens just yet. As Jake said, the good thing is we're dealing with people who are public servants who have been in office before. They know what they're doing. I tend to lean away from Frozen and closer to Teddy Pendergrass, Jason, where it's like, let it go. And so they recognize, just because the president tweets that he's still in office and he won't concede, it doesn't matter. We're moving forward. We have to stop saying, well, if Joe Biden is the 46th, he will be the 46th president of the United States. He is the president-elect. And so, luckily, there's still enough bureaucrats and people within, his orbit that know what to do. It's going to take a little longer. Sadly, the American people might be at risk because of coronavirus and as Dr. Fauci said, the slow transition and the slow handoff. But I don't think that we're at danger zone, level red just yet, because the president, even though he says he's not conceding, business is still moving forward. I think now, if we get to next week and we still have not had that paperwork signed and started transferring money, then I think the Biden camp needs to get a lot more aggressive. But I think right now they're on pace.
So, Jake, jumping off of what Dr. Greer just said, look, what is the impact of this slowed transition? I mean, what is generally occurring in our government now that has been slowed down because we can't get through a clear transition?
I will say this, though. I think what everyone said is right, but I think that most people who are working for Biden, many of the people in senior roles, Ron Klain, and just on down the line, have experience in government. So while they might not be getting top-level briefings, they might not be getting some information that they would otherwise get in a more, let's call it, hospitable circumstance. They are ready in the broad sense to take over the government. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that they are both familiar with this government and familiar with government as they believe it should work. But listen, I mean, getting money from the GSA is a big thing. Getting secure phone lines is a big thing. Right. So those things need to happen, and I assume they will happen in the coming week, or that's at least what the Trump administration tells me. But there's no doubt that this is slowing the process down.
So, Dr. DeFrancesco Soto, I want you to listen to this segment from Dr. Anthony Fauci this morning. I want to get your comments on the other side.
When is the last time President Trump attended a White House coronavirus task force meeting?
You know, it was months ago, but, you know, when we have our task force meeting, it's run, as you know, by Vice President Pence. And the vice president then translates that to the president himself. But the last time the president was physically at a task force meeting was several months ago.
So I want you to put on your professor hat here. You basically have a student who has skipped class for the last several months. What impact do you think that's going to have on any kind of COVID response for the next 50-something days in the Trump administration?
Well, the key to the COVID response is really about logistics at this point, because we know President Trump is not going to put a mask mandate in order. You know, that ship has sailed. But what we do need right now, and Ron Klain talked about this on Meet the Press, and it was really powerful, because the fact is that, you know, God willing, the vaccine is coming, but how do you distribute that vaccine? And the fact that President Trump checked out, and it also seems that Pence is not all there. He may be physically there, but is not engaged. So how is this administration working with HHS to then figure out the distribution? Because the cavalry is coming, but at the end of the day, how do we maximize that cavalry, that vaccine that's coming? So for me, it's that inner workings, the kind of political science, boring part of the executive branch, but that's what really affects our lives and what is going to save us from the coronavirus killing millions of more Americans. So I think the devil's in the details here of the logistics of how we distribute the vaccine.
Dr. Greer, what should we make of yesterday's Million MAGA March? Now, look, I know there were nice people on both sides, but once the Proud Boys showed up, Vanilla ISIS, the Forever 21 version of the alt-right, things seem to be getting really, really violent. And this seemed like more of a call to violence than a political rally. What are your thoughts about this and what America should do going forward with, obviously, a force of people who are not going to disappear even after Joe Biden becomes president?
Right. I think the response from the president is resounding. I mean, the fact that he refuses to condemn them and has continuously refused to condemn them. You know, Jason, it's really concerning, because if you listen to some of the chants that they were saying, you know, about there needs to be bloodshed, this is our country, we will fight to the death, this is our new civil war. All they need is for the president to continue to encourage them, the police to continue to support them and treat them as though they're the victims. Obviously, it wasn't a huge success. I find it so interesting that the Blue Lives Matter movement and the Million MAGA March, you know, are sort of weak, you know, sort of knockoffs of really powerful black movements. So it's like, get your own even language by, you know, before you even begin. But it's really concerning, especially since we know that there have been several reports about the infiltration of white supremacists in police departments across the country. So as we see these people somewhat galvanized, but also sometimes supported by police officers who refuse to use the same tactics that they've consistently used against innocent black protesters or Black Lives Matter protesters. So it's quite a frightening moment, and I do know that the next 66 days will be very interesting for our country as we move forward in our peaceful transition.
Jake Sherman, Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, and Christina Greer. Thanks, guys. Congresswoman Barbara Lee joins us next to talk about what should be an ongoing transition of power.